Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be tuning in from. Welcome to episode 55 of LinkedIn live streams from Veeam. More than halfway to 100, Jason. So we've been doing this for, 15 months now, I believe. Maybe it's 16 months at this point. Time flies.
Isn't that crazy?
And speaking of time flying, this is the third of our three-part series on as a service. It's kind of amazing that it's actually been 3 weeks already. But if you've not tuned in a couple of the past episodes, be sure to check those out on demand. We do have them. They're actually available both on the LinkedIn channel here as well as our YouTube channel. And before we go any further, Jason, we should let everyone know, be sure to give us a comment, shout out where you're tuning in from. We will refer to a global map here from time to time to see where people might actually be checking us out from. We always love to see that. Here you can see the U.S.-based production team is lit up. I'm in Colorado. Jason's in Texas. Our producer's in Georgia. We're getting some help from Europe as well on the social side. So be sure to give us either a comment of where you're from, or if you've got a comment about what we're discussing or a question about what we're discussing, be sure to mention that as well, because we do have a team that will shoot that over to us. So, Jason, we've been doing a lot of research this year, and we've been doing a lot of discussion on that research. Take us through what we've been doing these last couple of weeks on as a service. And I see you've got your shirt.
I do. I have my Bonafide T-shirt on, so and hopefully folks can see that. Why BaaS when you can DRaaS? So I'm not allowed to have favorites, on this program. But I will tell you, if you produce stuff that you catch from Twitter and you send it to us, we will probably wear it. In fact, I have to give a big toast out to my friends at Global Data Vault for this really fancy mug, which, by the way, also serves coffee almost as well as they serve disaster recovery. So yeah, so what we're covering for this 3-week period is earlier this year, we surveyed 1,000 organizations looking at backup as a service and DRaaS service, right? So truly cloud-powered data protection. And every respondent was the IT decision maker for organizations of all sizes, and really just kind of looking at what are the drivers and the challenges. So in week 1, what does BaaS mean, right? There's a lot of different people. As long as your data goes to the cloud, is that BaaS? Maybe, not always. Right. So the first week was, what is BaaS? The second week was, what really are the drivers towards BaaS, and also the challenges and considerations against, right? What do you need to be doing to mindfully look at BaaS and DRaaS solutions holistically and how it might fit your environment? And then, of course, BaaS and DRaaS is a partner-centric offer, right? It's about service providers complementing your teams, complementing your infrastructure, helping you get better outcomes. So why wouldn't we want to finish this series talking about why and how to choose a service provider?
Awesome. And I should mention we're doing some new technology as of late. We're doing live captioning. So people that are watching us live, you can opt out of that if you like. There's a little CC icon. You can turn that off. If you're doing a video on demand view, meaning after we are no longer live, the closed captioning or CC is off by default. So feel free to adjust that to your liking. Great tee up, Jason, on the last couple of weeks and then what we're doing this week. I think let's jump right into that first slide because I think it's really fascinating.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, when you think about BaaS and DRaaS, when you think about leveraging a service provider, I think the most important thing to look at is not the provider. It's not the fact that your zeros and ones are going someplace other than what you do. It's really about the service. It's about that expertise. And so one of the opening questions we had in this particular research was, who's doing the work, right? And so you got two lenses on this. When we look at traditional OS-based platforms. So this is your servers, this is your endpoints, so laptops, desktops, whatever. Who's actually primarily managing backup jobs when a service provider is now part of your virtual team? And so that's what you're looking on the left-hand side, which I think is really interesting because you do see statistically almost an even split between when IT operations, that's your own people, are doing those backups. That's the light green in the upper right-hand quadrant of that pie chart. And then you've got the staff at that BaaS and DRaaS provider, right? So being able to call and say, hey, how are my jobs doing? Right? Hey, can you restart this? Can you troubleshoot this? It's one of the best reasons to have a BaaS or DRaaS player. Right. And then you've got, those context sensitive stuff. So you're in a robo. Yeah, the robo IT folks are going to be part of that. You're talking about an endpoint. Yeah, the endpoint operator is going to be part of that. But I think it's equally interesting that when we look at those centralized experts, it's an even mix between IT ops and the BaaS providers themselves. Dave, was that surprising to you at all?
Yeah, it is. And, one of the things I like about these results, and actually a lot of the results we've seen from the as a service research, is it's not a singular thing. There's no one motivation for it. In this case, there's no one role that's predominantly active. It really depends on that organization and how they like to do business, or at least how they're currently doing business at the moment. So it shows the flexibility of the deployment model, but I think it's very interesting that the only constant is, it seems like all over the world, any company size, any vertical, they're interested in this deployment model. After that, it depends and it varies kind of a response.
Yeah, and I think the main thing we should take away, hopefully, from this whole series is the fact that BaaS does not mean one thing.
Right.
It is not just about expertise. It is not just about a local appliance. It is not just about cloud consumption, right? It's about leveraging the power of cloud in whatever way makes the most sense for you to accomplish your data protection goals, staff and provider. Before we get off the slide, though, let me kind of throw a little twist on this. When we look on the OS-centric, the traditional workloads on the left, when you look at the right, you see something a little bit different. In fact, next month in July, Veeam will be publishing what we call our Cloud Trends Report for 2021, looking at all the different protection scenarios. And I think it's interesting that a little bit of foreshadowing, that data is going to show that that while central IT predominantly drives traditional backups, when it comes to SaaS platforms, the application owner has a much larger share of responsibility. When we ask that same question in this BaaS and DRaaS report, we again see something very similar, where again, central IT, they're looking at all the data across the organization, and yet you see a little bit less of the BaaS admin because you see a lot more of the SaaS admin, right? They want that contextual awareness. Who better to decide protection and recovery policies for Office 365 than the Office 365 admin? And yet you see that the BaaS player being right arm in arm there, trying to help those folks out. I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, and we alluded to it just a moment ago about from a BaaS perspective, what was the motivation? If we go to the next slide, though, we put a finer point on it. Now, admittedly, there's a lot of words going on here, but it's actually very easy to decompose. These columns are just sorted by the size of organization as expressed by number of employees. So you've got 52, just under 100 in the far left. If you go to the right, you're above 5,000 employees. But just, I love how you color-coded this, Jason, because you don't even have to read. You can just look at the colors and get an understanding of, wow, this doesn't vary dramatically at all by employees count or size.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So one key thing to point out, we didn't show the busy version of this chart. There's like 15 different things that customers use as choosing one BaaS provider over another. And what we did was we took the top 5 of those, because it would be very easy when you look at the whole list to say, well, okay, this is why people across the research report said this is how I chose my BaaS provider, but that's only for SMB, right? Or that's only for enterprise. It's like, you know what? Yeah, let's ask that question. So we took the same question and we just cut it by the size of respondent. And it turns out, no, it doesn't matter, right? For a lot of these things, there's a lot of commonality. What you see across purple, that royal purple color, that means that is king, right, is data security.
Yeah.
Right? We if you haven't watched last week's episode, we talked about what were the concerns and challenges in going to BaaS. Security was the biggest thing, right? Not only the idea of my data is out of my hand, so is it secure that way? I want to reduce the ability for cyber to go and get that data. I also want to make sure that the BaaS and DRaaS provider doesn't see my data either, right? So there's lots of security considerations. And if you are a service provider and you are listening to this session today, what I'm going to tell you, the number one reason why a customer will choose you or not is, do they think their data is secure, right? So if you're not starting every conversation off, not just with the white glove, not just with, well, we're in all these different countries and we've been around forever. If you're not starting the conversation off with your data is holy and secure, then you're not meeting the customer with what they're looking for. Past that, great service and support. Past that, making sure that what the software is the customer already wants to use is hugely important. Take a look at the brown lines, right? So the backup software being offered. So in many cases, the customer already is using something they're mostly happy with on-prem. They want to augment that to the cloud. They don't want to reboot their entire solution just because they've decided to turnkey a service. So anyway, so that's the list overall, but there really isn't that much difference between sizes of orgs.
Yeah, and conversely, the thing that jumped out at me, Jason, is unlike what we've seen with on-prem, where cost is really paramount. And we actually saw that from our data protection report. Globally, costs or concerns about costs came up actually about 3 different ways in the top 12 responses in terms of what would cause you to switch backup solutions. But on as a service, cost was nowhere near the top. Now, to be fair, we're showing you the top 5 different responses. So it's not 1 through 5. It was actually about 1 through 20 or at least 1 through 15 that we offered people in terms of selections. However, here, cost is in the top third or so, but it's certainly not the number one criteria, is it?
Yeah, and I think what I think we're seeing here with this data is the first question is why, and then the second question is which, right? And so when we talk about why would you go to BaaS, economics fares very heavily, right? I want to improve my consumption model. I want to only pay with what I use. You know, there's lots of different economic drivers. I want to get better ROI and TCO, and I think I'll do that by not investing in Stack. So the why question, economics fares really high as to why I want to go to BaaS at all. Once I pass that decision hurdle, now I'm going to choose which BaaS provider that I want to use. Then economics is no longer part of the question because I think they assume that BaaS is already cheaper or at least more economically viable. So now it's okay, which way am I going to go, right? It's the first question you ask yourself is, can I afford a new car, right? And am I going to lease versus buy? And then after that, now I get to go and choose the car. And that's what this list is telling us is how you're going to choose the car, or in this case, the BaaS service provider that makes the most sense for you.
Awesome. Now, before we hit the DRaaS or disaster recovery as a service, similar kind of concept to this, let's go back to our world map. I think we've got a dozen or so countries that have come in.
There you go.
And, always nice when something big like Australia lights up. But we can see there, we've got Australia and India, Japan. We look over in Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa. Good. Got to focus on that. And then in Europe, we've got United Kingdom, Belgium, Poland, Czech Republic, and in the Middle East, we've got Qatar. And not wanting to leave anyone out, we've also got the Cayman Islands, which is kind of a rarity for us, Jason. So that's good fun.
I kind of feel like we should be live streaming from the Caymans. I feel like they have a special need for us. But, there's some great countries on this list that I'm especially keen on. I always love it when ANZ, when Australia or New Zealand chimes in, mostly, especially in this series, right? So in a lot of our research, it seems like the Aussies are really very pro-cloud, very pro on the as a service model. And so often when we look at the data, they're almost always on that front leading edge as far as how to delight customers with cloud-based technology. So I love hearing that. Certainly, it is really late for our friends in India, and yet you can count on them being on the call every week. When we talk about modern tech and modern IT, kudos to them as well. And then, of course, my friends in South Africa, progressive in technology and fantastic in meat and wine. So for all those reasons and any other country that I haven't mentioned, thanks for joining and just keep piling on for that.
Yeah. And now if we double click on taking a similar kind of view as we did for BaaS, but now focused on disaster recovery or DRaaS, top 5 reasons, same concept, Jason, we've banded it by number of employees. Interesting, the top reason was for BaaS is the top reason for DRaaS as well, which is data security.
Yeah, and not to overly plug, but that's why I'm wearing a T-shirt that says "Why BaaS when you can DRaaS." I think you're going to see a lot of more organic conflating of these two concepts over time. So it shouldn't surprise us that the top reasons of how you would choose a BaaS provider are in many cases the top reasons that you choose a DRaaS provider, right? So in both cases, you have a mechanism for synchronizing. I'm using that in the lowercase s, which includes backups and snaps and replicas, to get your data out of the building. And then the question becomes, am I looking at restoring data or am I looking at recovering servers? And the mechanics behind the scenes are very different. The expertise, one is a significant superset of the other. But as far as how would you choose the provider, what matters most is my data secure? Two, what are the capabilities that I have? And then three, what kind of service and support am I going to get? Right. And by the way, those are not three bullets. That is number one, number two, number three. That is ordinal. Answer those three questions and you will continue to deliver a great service business.
Yeah, and similar kind of comment here, you know, cost only comes up in 3 of the bands overall, but never higher than number 3 on the list. So while cost always at some point cost matters, but it's important to understand, I think especially because disaster recovery, the knock always used to be, well, DR is very difficult and it's also very costly, therefore we've not fully addressed it. However, I don't think, especially when you're dealing with as a service, that the difficulty needs to necessarily be as great of a burden, but cost itself not coming up high on the list again.
Yeah, and again, I think the other thing I would draw folks back to, this is why we do these as a series, right? And not just, you know, popcorn-based topics. When you go back to last week, what you would find is when customers said whether or not to do BaaS, there were 2 things: data survivability and economics, 3 different kinds of economics. But when we asked organizations, why would you DRaaS? It wasn't just economics, right? They wanted, there was cloud first strategy. They wanted to reduce secondary infrastructure. They wanted better expertise. They wanted the process that comes with testing and documentation. Oh, by the way, and they also wanted better economics and data survivability, right? So there was a much wider variety of why DRaaS itself. And then once you've crossed that hurdle, that gate, then this says, okay, and how are you going to choose DRaaS now that you know you're going to do DRaaS? Oh, okay, we're right back to the same things: security, service, support. Oh, and it'd be really great if you were using the software that I already rely on and standardize on, because I don't want to reboot my entire environment. So.
Yep. And I should mention, if you're tuning in kind of recently, we have enabled closed captioning capability within LinkedIn. If you're watching us live, I believe the default is closed caption on. You can go and tweak that setting, though. If you want to be utilizing that, it works best in full screen mode, of course. So just make that point. If you're watching later, meaning on demand, the default is to have CC off. Next slide blew my mind, Jason, because the satisfaction level is incredible. You know, I always think it was at one point I started off life as a tester and mainframe backup before becoming a developer, and I always looked at boundary conditions. And, you know, so right away you look at, okay, what's both ends of the spectrum? Well, the very satisfied, the highest rating you could give, is approaching half. Now, conversely, if you're really upset, meaning dissatisfied, or the next level, somewhat dissatisfied, that in aggregate is 1%. So 99% are varying levels of satisfied.
Yeah, and I think this comes back to the fact that for many people, they don't want to deal with backup, right? They just want it to work, right? And if they can cut a check and they get the outcome they want, and they're getting it with an economic value prop that they deem appropriate, then yeah, I'm going to be really happy, right? And so I love this. Now, there's a couple things that you should be thinking about, though. What that means is that once you go with a BaaS and DRaaS provider, if you have done the due diligence, you've selected based on security and support and service, you're probably in them with them, right? I mean, this is going to be a thing. So I don't think you're going to see as much moving from one BaaS or DRaaS provider due to SAT, right? Now, that is not the only vector. I think the other vector that will likely affect the stickiness of BaaS and DRaaS providers overall is going to be the underlying tech, right? So if you love the service, but they don't offer the capability that you need. So for example, if they do BaaS but not yet DRaaS, right? That could be a problem. It'd be like outgrowing your car, right? I love my 2-seater coupe, but when I start having kids, can't have that car anymore, right? I love protecting just my little Windows and Linux boxes. But as I start adding Azure hosting, AWS hosting, Office 365, right? When I start outgrowing that basic scenario, I'm going to have to go look, right? Because my provider's got to be able to cover that. So as long as those service providers are covering the set of capabilities and the set of protected workloads that you need, your satisfaction number probably is going to be really, really high. You're going to be with them, right? This is a marriage, not a dating deal. So once you're in, you're probably in for good, and that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, if you're getting, I agree. If you're getting the results that you need, and you're also being able to potentially redeploy workforce into other areas, it's all net positive. And as we kind of wind down our last slide, I like this one. This is in some ways almost one of my favorite slides in our whole as a service series. And so, yeah, I'll let you drive us through here, but I just was really pleased with it.
So, like everything else in BaaS and DRaaS, it depends, right? And so in this case, the question we were looking for was how much white glove do you want versus how much do you really just want to manage the whole thing yourself, but just on somebody else's metal, right? Those are the two extremes. And so we asked this is actually the same question. We asked, what describes your level of how you'd like to utilize BaaS and DRaaS? And basically there's everything is managed by IT on one side. Everything is managed by the DRaaS provider on the other. And then there's varying degrees through the middle. And then there's a neutral balance. And what you see on the left-hand side is that for about, what do we got, 55, 60-ish% of organizations, 63 maybe, percent of organizations, they still want to manage it. They just don't want to have to shepherd it all the time, right? They're gonna run their jobs. But they're not expecting someone to come and just completely turn it over. Whereas there's a smaller percentage that are actually kind of looking for that. I really want everything to be done by there. What you look at on the right is we reweighted the data without without the middle, right? Without it could be either or, right? So basically it forces the respondents to choose. Would you be more self-managed or more managed by the provider? And then we thought, well, maybe that varies by industry size, right? Maybe a small business wants it completely turnkey and enterprise wants to be self-governed. Turns out that's not true, right? So with 1,000 respondents looking on that right-hand side, pretty much regardless of the size of the org, what I think you see is there is a market for a premium white glove experience, that 15 to 19%, that light green in the upper right-hand quadrant. There is a market, just like I have a friend of mine works at a car dealership, Sewell, and they do this true hands-on customer-led experience. And then there's people that I know that go to CarMax. They want to buy it themselves. They just want to transact and be done, right? But there is a market for both sides of that, and I love that. There's not a turnkey for that. I love the white glove experience. It's actually what I would prefer as a BaaS and DRaaS. But there's a lot of folks that I want to know that it works. I don't want to have to babysit it. I want the errors to go away, right? I just want it to work economically. And so that's what this data really kind of shows is there's not just one market or one way to consume BaaS.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the best takeaways. If I netted out these last 3 weeks, it's that there is strong global interest for as a service offerings and availability, whether it's BaaS or DRaaS. However, some of what the results are may surprise you, meaning that it's not all about cost and actually the way that you deploy it, what you're looking to get out of it, how you want it managed can vary widely. So if we think about how you should choose a partner, make sure you're partnering with someone that can deliver the experience the way that you would like to consume it. And if you're not finding that with a partner, then you need to move on because there's many other providers. This data shows that you're not alone if you think, well, this is the way that I would like to do something. No, a lot of people have ways that they want to consume the capabilities. And you're absolutely right to want to express that. So as we wind down, Jason, we're going to switch gears next week, next Monday. You're going to be out of the office. I'm going to have one of our awesome SEs, Brad Lynch, join me. And we're going to basically drill down on some of the Veeam features that people maybe don't use or use enough of. But before that, this Friday, Mark Crespi from Exagrid is going to join Rick Vanover and Melissa Palmer. I was just thinking, I think I met Mark about 15, maybe 16 years ago now. So he has been in this space and Exagrid for quite some time. And then I think I'll give a tee up for what we just talked about this morning. We're going to have another 3-part series month after next. Maybe just give folks a little preview of that.
Well, so what are we doing next month? So I know we've got a DR series coming up in September.
Yep, that's what I'm thinking of. Why don't you
but we got like this little month of August in between. So in between the DR series in September and this series, we're going to take a closer look at some of the solution scenario stuff that's out there. So we're going for Veeam On, I actually took several of our research projects and I remixed the data from different research sets into a couple solution specific things. I think that's our plan for August. So looking forward to that as well. In the meantime, though, I get to take some time off. I'm going to go to a scout camp for 10 days and hang out in a tent. So I will see y'all next month.
Outstanding. I'm being told we had some other countries that just came in. So make sure you want to recognize them. Spain, you can see there, Morocco,
nice.
And United Arab Emirates, UAE as well. Thank you very much for that. So a quick count there, somewhere around 16, maybe a little more than 16 countries globally. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining us. Do encourage you to check out the conversation with Exagrid this Friday and a week from today, some of the underutilized Veeam features with one of our awesome SEs, Brad Lynch and myself. Jason will be on much-deserved PTO. Until then, stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you on the next live stream. Thank you.
Bye.